Good day, future educators, and to our beloved instructor, Ma'am Lapore. Good day, ma'am. So, how are you guys? I hope you're all doing good right now. So, I will count 1 to 10 and I want you all to sit comfortably and prepare yourselves as we will learn something new for today's video. So, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and let's go. So, our topic for today is all about construction of holistic and analytical scoring rubric. So, before I start the discussion, here are the learning outcomes for today's lesson. At the end of this lesson, the students are expected to first recall the holistic and analytical scoring rubrics. Second, differentiate holistic and analytical scoring rubrics. And lastly, third, construct holistic and analytical scoring rubric. So, meet the presenters. Yours truly, I am Ruben Balduman Kantutay, and here is my beautiful partner, Miss Genevieve M. Malara. So the question is, are you ready? So, I know everyone is so excited. So, without further ado, let's get started. First, let's recall. So, what is a rubric, or what comes into your mind if you hear a word rubric? I know everyone is familiar about this word. So, rubric. Rubric is a guideline for rating the student's performance. It is a scoring tool that lists the criteria or what counts for a piece of work. Also, it is an evaluation tool that describes quality of a work on a range from excellent to poor. And rubric is a communication tool. So, generally, a rubric is typically an evaluation tool or set of guidelines used to promote the consistent application of learning expectations, learning objectives, and or learning standards in the classroom. So, always remember, a good rubrics must be reliable, valid, fair, and completely connected to what you are assessing for. So, there are two types of rubric. The first one is the holistic scoring rubric, and the second one is the analytical scoring rubric. So, I, Ruben Balduman Kantutay, will discuss about the first type of rubric, which is the holistic rubric. So, holistic rubric, it provides a single score based on an overall impression of a student's performance on a task. It used to score student work as a whole, yielding one holistic score. So, when we say holistic rubric, it consists of a single scale with all criteria to be included in the evaluation being considered together. So, when to use holistic rubrics? So, you will use holistic rubrics when there is no correct answer or response to a task. For example, creative work. Also, you will use holistic rubrics when the focus is on an overall quality, proficiency, or understanding of a specific content or skills. Then, you will use holistic rubrics when the assessment is summative. For example, at the end of the semester or major. Then, you will use also holistic rubrics when assessing significant numbers. For example, 150 students' portfolio. So, we are now on the main point for today's lesson, which is how to construct a rubric. So, how to construct a holistic scoring rubric. There are 3 steps in order to construct a holistic scoring rubric. The first step is determine all the skills and abilities students need to demonstrate in order to achieve the learning outcome. So basically, you will determine or indicate what you want to see from students and their performance. For example, the abilities and skills students need to demonstrate in their performance are clarity, organization, and grammar. So, the second step on how to construct a holistic scoring rubric is determine the appropriate levels of accomplishment. So, if we say determine appropriate levels of accomplishment, there it can be numbers, or let's say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or we can also say letters, for example A, B, C, D to F, or for example also we can use words, for example above average, sufficient, developing, and needs improvement. So the third step and the final step on how to construct a holistic scoring rubric is write an overall description of how a student would demonstrate the learning outcome for each level of accomplishment. Since in step 2 you already determined the appropriate levels of accomplishments, then in step 3 you will write an overall description of each level of accomplishment. For example, on above average, the audience or the description on above average, which is the audience is able to easily identify the focus of the work and is engaged by its clear focus and relevant details. Information is presented logically and naturally. There are no more than two mechanical errors or misspelled words to distract the reader. So, sufficient, developing, and needs improvement. The above average, sufficient, developing, needs improvement are the levels of accomplishment, while on their left side is their own overall description. So, that's how you construct a holistic scoring rubric. So here is an example of holistic rubrics. So we have a score which is the level of accomplishment from 0 to 5, then and the other side which is the description of each level of accomplishment. So I think that's all for my discussion or reports about holistic rubric. So I will pass this to my partner, Ms. Genevieve Malaran, to discuss about the analytical scoring rubrics. So I think that's all. Bye.
Good morning, class. Good morning, Ma'am Lapore. So, as what Raven had said, our topic focuses on the construction of holistic and analytical scoring rubric. And Raven had already discussed to you about the concept and the construction of the holistic scoring rubric. And now, on my part, I'm also going to discuss to you about the second type of rubric, which is the analytical scoring rubric. The last group have elaborated the concept of the analytical scoring rubric, and I'm just going to have a sort of review about what analytic scoring rubric is. So, analytic rubric provides specific feedback along several dimensions and descriptors of products. It breaks the objective into component parts. Each portion is scored independently using a rating scale, and the final score is made up of adding each component's part. So, unlike the scoring rubric, no, that it judges a performance as a whole. So, dili pareha ni analytic rubric na magbahig-bahig pa ta. There's components, there's parts, and there's criteria, something like that. So, when to use analytical scoring rubric. So when several faculty are collectively assessing students' work, when outside audiences will be examining rubric score, and when profiles of specific strength or weaknesses are decided. So that's when you use analytical scoring rubrics. So how to construct an analytical scoring rubric. So We are now on the construction, the very main point of our topic for today. So step 1 is to determine the various skills and abilities that students should demonstrate to show achievement of the learning outcome. So these skills and abilities are the various criteria. Each criterion should focus on a different skill identified by a phrase or brief statement, and each criterion should be measurable through the examination of student work. The criteria become the leftmost column of the grid. So the step 1 no, is to determine the various skills and abilities that students should demonstrate. So unsa man ang mga various skills and abilities na gusto nimo makita sa students work sa kanang ilahang performance task or sa essay na gigamon sa mga estudyante, no? So we have these examples, no? Like the holistic scoring rubric, as you recall that on the step 1 we have also these criteria like the clarity, organization, and mechanics. So in clarity, test is supported by relevant information and ideas. So kung natukma ba ang mga information nga imuhang input sa imuhang output sa topic nga imuhang i-discuss, or ang topic nga example essay, kung ang imong essay is about global warming, yan ikalit kag dong sa out of school use. So what's the connection between the two? So like that, no, dapat we have to judge kung relevant ba ang information na gipamutang sa mga estudyante. Like they're very have you heard of kanang something like para taas lang basahon mo nang butang-butangan na laman og bisag unsa na information na irrelevant sa topic na ilahang gipili, something like that. And the organization is the sequencing of elements and ideas. Balik ka puntang essay. So kung essay, we have the basic sequence of the essay or the elements. We have the body, the beginning, the body, and the conclusion. So basin og nagbaylo-baylo na, no, we also need to judge kung nasakto ba ang pag-sequence sa mga ideas, basin og ang conclusion niya nauna or di kay ang body kay nahimong introduction nga na, something like that. Mechanics, correctness of grammar and spelling. Of course, we also have to judge the grammatization and the spelling of the students' work. So even in role playing, so they have to speak English in correct grammar, no? Because spelling, we can only judge spelling on essays, like something like that, written outputs, no? So in grammar, we can also judge it in group work like role playing. So kung sakto ba ilang gipangyaw-yaw, no? Sakto na ang idea ba kanang lamin na kayo paminawon, pero ang grammar kay di ay kay kanang nagkabalitok-balitok. Anya mo nang murag ma-off gyud, no? Ma-off ang ilahang performance, pero sagdi lang. Next step is to determine the levels of achievement possible given the expectations of what students are to be able to demonstrate. So the levels can be numerical categories, but more frequently are descriptions, sometimes with an associated number. It is at this stage that the number of columns is determined and the levels of achievement are listed across the top row. So now the step 2 is we're going to determine the levels of achievement. So step 1 is to determine the skills and abilities, like the criteria that you are going to judge. And step 2 is the levels of performance. So how kanang asa ba na sila dapit, so naara ba na sila sa 3, 4, something like that. So it is mostly accompanied with numbers, na, so that is easy to score. Here's achievement level. So numbers from 1 to 4 through 6. So that's mostly the numbers that are to be associate with the levels of performance, no, nga na. So we have this short description. So if they're unacceptable, marginal, proficient to distinguished. We have beginning, developing, competent to exemplary. We have novice, intermediate, proficient, distinguished to master. We have needs improvement, satisfactory, good, and accomplished. We have poor, minimal, sufficient, above average, and excellent. We have unacceptable, emerging, minimally acceptable, acceptable, accomplished, and exemplary. So these are the common examples of achievement levels. No, so as you notice that it came from the very low per low to the higher order. No, kanang from unacceptable to exemplary, from beginning to exemplary. Nga na. So here is an example. We have needs improvement to above average. From the very low, musaka siya kalit ang level, no? Ay, kalit na ba? We have needs improvement, 1. We have developing, 2. Sufficient, 3. And above average, 4. Excuse me. So while one can easily imagine how letter grades could be assigned to each of the columns, so this is really done when assessing learning outcomes, as grades are often seen as summative measures, and assessment in this context is formative and is intended to identify students' strengths and weakness. So padag sa gyud ka makakita nga letters ang ibutang i-accompany sa levels of performance. So it is mostly accompanied with numbers because it is easy to kuan man, it is easy to tally the scores, no? Easy to grade and something like that. However, one can clearly see that the two are not mutually exclusive. So when numerical scores are associated with the levels of accomplishment, they can be aggregated and averages and percentages can be calculated to describe the degree to which students in a program are able to demonstrate learning outcomes. So as what I've said, it is very easy to grade and calculate the scores of the students when you are going to accompany the levels of performance with numbers than of letters. So we have the step 3 and the last step. Create descriptions for the criteria along each level of assessment. So dinhin na no kanang magkabangga na ni sila under sa level of performance and under the criteria. So while sometimes this step is skipped, so kasagaran jud no kanang skip na ni na step, but this is not recommended, no, as the descriptions are valuable for helping to increase reliability among multiple raters and even for a single rater as she assesses the work of different students. So of course with the descriptions we'll know at what at what state can we say that the students need improvement, at what states of the criteria can we say that the students are above average already. No, kanang it is easy for us to score and judge the students with the descriptions. One way to begin writing the descriptions is to write a short paragraph or even just a sentence or two for the highest level of ability of one criteria. So we have to the easiest way or the something like that to write description is to begin with the highest level of ability, sa level of performance. We have to write at least one sentence for that. Now, next is to circle the words that can indicate various levels of performance. So these are the words that will be changed as you write descriptions for the remaining levels of performance. So it would be easier for if you would do that to. So kung una ka sa highest level of ability sa kuan kanang as description, maguna ka na, you just have to encircle the letters that would make it wag ka ng basis sa level bitaw, so that mora na ing imong i-replacean as you go along or you go decrease the level of performance sa kuano description. We have the various levels of performance no in the description. So ganina it was the top row man to siya sa levels, the exact level of performance that is accompanied with numbers. So kini is the description of the bit. So from presence to absence. So since we're we're going to start from the highest level of ability and the level of performance. So from presence to absence, kita. From complete to incomplete, from many to some to none, from major to minor, from consistent to inconsistent, from frequency, or in the frequency rather, from always to usually to sometimes to rarely. So there are the concepts that convey various levels of performance. An example, no, kaganina, we have the leftmost part of the column. We have the criteria, we have the clarity, organization, and mechanics. So the top row, we have the levels of performance. We have the needs improvement accompanied with 1, developing with 2, sufficient as 3, and above average as 4. And then halfway we have the descriptions, no. So there are the various the concepts of the various levels of performance. So there are the descriptions. So starting from the highest level of ability, no, from above average under clarity. So the central purpose of the student work is clear and supporting ideas are always well focused. So unsa may nakakuan ani nga highest level na siya is clear and supporting ideas are always well focused. Details are relevant, enrich the work. So pag abot sa sufficient, of course na usob because na usob sad ang level sa performance nga under niya. So the central purpose of the student work is clear and ideas are almost always focused in a way that supports the thesis. Relevant details illustrate the author's side. So unsa may nausob? So from above average, we have are always well focused. Pag abot sa sufficient, tahimon na siyang almost always focused. So pag abot sa developing, of course na may nasa naman siya 1, so maustob na po siya. The central purpose of the student work is identified. Ideas are generally focused in a way that supports the thesis. So, generally focused na siya, no? And the central purpose, ang purpose na sa kanang the student work is identified. Nahibawan ra, dili ra kayo siya relevant, dili ra siya kayo clear. And sa needs improvement mo dyan ang lowest level of ability, the purpose of the student work is not well defined. Central ideas are not focused to support the thesis. Thoughts appear disconnected. So, mo ni under ni sa clarity, as what I've said ganina, that kanang naiuban ni estudyante na pataka ra og butang mga information that are irrelevant to the topics that they've chosen or that you've given to them para lang ingnon nga taas nilang essay. So of course it will fall under needs improvement kay irrelevant man ang information na ilang gi input sa ilang output. So under organization, balik na sa highest level of ability. So the information and ideas are presented in a logical sequence which flows naturally and is engaging to the audience. So, presented in a logical sequence which flows naturally. So, organization, no, dili siya libog, like sayon na siya sabton nya makaengganyo og mga audience. So, under sufficient, information and ideas are presented in a logical sequence which is followed by the reader with little or no difficulty. So, naari gamay na, mura gamay nga confusion or mura wala ra kayo or dili ra kayo clear, unlike sa above average nga kanang maka-engage yung mga audience kay dali ra kayo siya sabtun. So, under developing, information and ideas are presented in an order that the audience can follow with minimum difficulty. So, na siya kanang magwang ra ang iyahang kalisod sabton sa sufficient. So, gani, kayo level man siya. So, needs improvement. Information and ideas are poorly sequenced or the author jumps around. The audience has difficulty following the thread of thought. So, under na dyan sa mo na dyan ang lowest na gyud na level of ability, no, nga information are poorly sequenced na gyud nga nag mura na siya og ga-summarize imbes whole to dapat ang i-present sa role play mo ga-summarize na lang sila kay lisod na siya sabton. Ay, at least ang summarize no dali na siya masabot hinuon kay kuan naglat-ang gyud siya. So the audience has difficulty following the thread of thought. Galisod og sabot ang mga nananaw. Kung group performance ang kuano gigamas mga estudyante. So lisod kayo sabton sa nga tanan. So under mechanics na sad, the correctness of grammar and spelling. So the highest level of ability, which is above average, there are no more than 2 misspelled words or grammatical errors in the document. So, mga isa, duha, or wala, more na jud ang kanang grammatical errors gatapo pag yun na. Og ang mga kanang incorrect nga spelling no sa of course written gyud ta mag-base ani kay nag-con man ta og grammar spelling. Pero grammar, we can judge, as what I've said, we can judge grammar and role play or basta mga oral presentation, something like that. So under sufficient, there are no more than 3 misspellings and or grammatical errors per page and no more than 5 in the entire document. So the readability of the work is minimally interrupted by errors. So dili siya lisod sabton bisan og naa siya mga mali na spelling or mali na grammar ang under sa sufficient, no, like the entire document, like no more than 5 errors in the entire document. And in the developing, there are no more than 4 misspellings and or systematic grammatical errors per page or 6 or more in the entire document. Errors distract from the work. So, nagka-anam na uno nga ma-distract na tagbasa, as what I've said ganina nga kanang kung mobasa ta or motan-aw ta ko og performance task nga martag malibog kay lahi ang grammar or kanang sayop ang grammar mo nang imbes mao na to masayop mag-grammar, lahi ang pasabot. Naman ang libog na magsunod sa istorya or libog na magbasa sa kanang sa essay or sa work, sa written work. So, needs improvement, ang pinaka-lowest. So, there are 5 or more misspellings and or systematic grammatical errors per page or 8 or more in the entire document. The readability of the work is seriously hampered by errors. Like, grabe na gyud. Hapit di na jud masabtan ang kanang written output sa estudyante or sa group performance nila, no, kay galisod na gyud og sabot kay tungod sa mga grammatical errors sa spelling kung mag-written output ta. So mo bitaw na no kung for example sa kung na magbasahan og Wattpad ani, no, or even sa mga text sa Facebook sa makita niyo in everyday life. So di ba makabagot magbasa kung daghang grammatical errors, kung daghang wrong spelling, no, kanang ako in my own experience nga magbasahan ko og Wattpad, like pagtan-an na daghang wrong grammar, mostly wrong grammar ramang gyud. Panagsara ka maka-encounter og wrong spelling. So daghang wrong grammar. Balik dayon kanang imbes gidong na to sa offline, gi-out na sa offline kay di na basahon kay maka-discourage man ang wrong grammar. So mo ni siya, this is an example of the analytical scoring rubric. So that's how you construct an analytical scoring rubric. Now that's the 3 steps, the 3 important steps. So what are those? We have to the step 1 is to determine the criteria of judging. Example, there's content, organization, and mechanics. Napadi ay, when you talk about the time management, we can also include in the criteria the time management or the timeliness of the students' work or activity. No, because it's important for students to learn how to manage their time, and it's important for them to also value your time as a teacher, because lisod ang mag gama og grado, lisod ang mag-grade. So lisod kay dili ra baya dili ra baya silay ato bangon nimo, no, daghan kaayo. And remember that time is gold, so importante gid ng time management ug time linis kung maghimo ka og rubric. Ay nakalimte. So as what I've said, we have step 1, the criteria, the step 2, the level of performances like needs improvement, and don't forget that we have to put that on the top row of the our table. And under step 1 is just the criteria is on the leftmost part of the column. So balik ta sa step 2. So levels of performance, you have the needs improving, developing, sufficient, above average, or any levels of performance that you can think of, as well as it came from presence to absence, something like that, or from the lowest ability to the highest ability that a student can attain. Now, and make sure to accompany it with numbers instead of letters, because it is hard for you to judge and grade students' performance through letters. Man, it is hard to calculate. And of course, the last step na you don't need to it is not necessary, I mean, it is not unsa ba na? It is not it shouldn't be skipped on the making of scoring rubric kay it is the most important mas sila, pero lagi importante dyan na siya, the descriptions, no, because it is easier for us to judge when there's description. It is easier for the students to make their own output or make their performance task if you'll give them the descriptions on of the levels of performance and the criteria, di ba? So, na sila'y basihan kung asa taman, kung kanang kuan ba na sila inspiration nga hala kung daghan ang spelling dapat dai nako ni kanang tarungon ang spelling og ang grammar sa ako ang work kay basin ma-fall ko sa needs improvement edi one ra ang akong score ni na nako tarungon og kanang og organize akong thoughts og kanang ang play no kay basin ma-fall ko sa developing tura ang score. Ni jud ako nga mag-search og mga relevant information and ideas from the internet, from the library, or any sources that you can think of para ma-fall ka sa above average, para naka-score na 4. Or sa timeliness. So, dapat ma-motivate imong mga students na dali on mig-pass, dali on gama para ang score nako is 4. Dili ko ma-fall sa needs improvement nga ang score na kay 1. Magdugay-dugay ko pasa like that. So need jud ang description. So that was the 3 steps. So unsa to? Step 1 is to determine the skills and abilities, that's the criteria. Step 2 is to determine the level of performance of the students from the lowest to the highest level of ability of the student can attain of. And the step 3, the descriptions. So mo to siya. This is the template, no? Yeah, the score, the last column. So anhin mo kanang i-odd, i-calculate ang mga scores na na-attain, as what I've said nga final score is added, no, from the different kanang components or the different parts of the rubric, no, that nailinya sa score. So mo na siya ang template, the example of a template. Of course, kanang don't limit yourself, no, with 4 or 3 ka kanang criteria, no, because there are many criterias nga pwede nimo i-judge sa students' work, no. Dili lang kay kadto lang akong gipang example, dili lang apil tong time management. So daghan ka pwede mabutang sa criteria, dili lang kadto ako makon. Kasi magamo ang criteria, hala, ang giingon naman sa example kay clarity, organization, and mechanics. Mara siguro ito criteria na ay dili. Ay napadig time management, pat ka criteria ra magbalik-balik sa scoring rubric, analytical. Ay dili. Don't limit yourself with those criteria. So, you can think or search of other criterias that kanang pwede nimo i-appeal, no, because there are many things to judge in an activity man. So dili pud nimo i-limit ra sa kadtura nga mga levels of performance from beginning to exemplary, needs improvement to above average. So dili nang no, as what I've said, nga daghan kayo sila unya ang numbers pod basin og kutubra pod 4, kutubra 3. So just remember that no, nga depende gyud na, it would depend to what activity or what to what extent nga maabot sa student or unsa imong gusto i-judge sa student's work or performance nga na. Think that's the end of our discussion for today, no? So I hope that you learned something and you enjoyed our discussion, no? Because I enjoyed discussing too, even if it's you know. So luckily we fell under one of the easiest topics here in this subject. And yeah, so for questions, concerns, or clarifications, just PM the presenters, me and Sir Raven. And for those who would also want to know where we get our information, so there's the online resources. We included that in our PPT, and just look at it if you want to. So I guess we're the last group to present, man. So that's all. Thank you, everyone, and may God bless you always.